The moment I raised my glass at my daughter's wedding reception, I felt 23 years of secrets pressing against my chest. 200 guests smiled in anticipation of a loving father's toast. My daughter, radiant in white, had no idea her entire life was built on a carefully constructed lie. And then it happened. A single name escaped my lips. Not the name everyone expected. The real name of her mother. Have you ever watched someone's world shatter in real time? My daughter's face transformed from joy to confusion to betrayal in seconds before she dropped her bouquet and ran sobbing from her own wedding. What could make a bride flee from the happiest day of her life? The answer involves a death that never happened, decades of intercepted letters, and a mother who watched her child grow up from the shadows. This is the story of how one stolen identity destroyed 3 lives, and how the truth, no matter how painful, always finds its way to the surface. If you're watching this from somewhere quiet, prepare yourself for a story that will haunt you long after it ends. Follow our channel for more real-life stories that reveal the extraordinary secrets hiding in ordinary lives. Like and comment below to tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever discovered a family secret that changed everything. The moment should have been perfect. My only daughter, Rebecca, Becca, as we've always called her, looked absolutely radiant in her white gown. 200 guests filled the church pews, smiling and dabbing tears of joy. The reception hall was decorated with lilies and roses, her favorites since childhood. Everything was exactly as she had dreamed it would be. But as I stood there, champagne flute in hand, ready to give my father of the bride speech, something felt terribly wrong. A phantom presence had been haunting me since I woke up that morning. A ghost from the past that I'd buried for over 20 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice shakier than I'd expected. At 63, I'd given countless presentations as a high school principal. Public speaking had never been my weakness. But this was different. This was about the secret I'd been keeping. I glanced at my daughter, her eyes filled with anticipation and love. I looked at her new husband, Thomas, beaming with pride. And then I saw Claire, my sister-in-law, sitting at the family table, wearing that self-satisfied smile she'd perfected over the years. The smile that said, "We did it. We got away with it." The weight of 2 decades of silence pressed against my chest. My hand trembled slightly as I raised my glass higher. "I want to thank you all for being here today to celebrate the union of these 2 wonderful young people," I continued, following the script I'd rehearsed countless times. As Becca's father, I've had the privilege of watching her grow from a curious little girl into the beautiful, intelligent, compassionate woman you see before you today. The guests nodded appreciatively. This was going well. "Just stick to the plan, Frank," I told myself. Becca has always been special. When she was 5, she insisted on wearing mismatched socks because, as she put it, life is too short for boring feet. At 12, she organized a neighborhood fundraiser for the local animal shelter after finding a stray puppy. And in high school, she tutored struggling students, never asking for anything in return. Becca was blushing now, squeezing Thomas's hand. Claire dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the role of the proud mother perfectly. The same role she'd been playing since Becca was 4 days old. As a father, you dream about this day from the moment your child is born. You imagine walking her down the aisle, giving her away to someone worthy of her love. And I couldn't be prouder to welcome Thomas into our family. I paused, feeling something shift inside me. 23 years of lies suddenly felt too heavy to carry any further. I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her, and saw Evelyn's eyes staring back at me. The same warm brown eyes that had captivated me the first time we met at Boston University, back in 1999. They say a daughter learns what love is by watching how her father treats her mother, I continued, deviating from my prepared remarks. And I hope that Becca has learned that love is about honesty, courage, and sacrifice. Claire shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She knew this wasn't part of the approved speech. I took a deep breath. What I was about to do would change everything. It would hurt people, especially Becca, but the truth had been buried too long. There's something about watching your child get married that makes you reflect on your own life choices, I said, my voice growing steadier as resolve replaced uncertainty. The choices that shaped not just your life but the lives of those you love most. I could feel Claire's eyes boring into me now, warning me, silently commanding me to stop. "And so on this special day I'd like to propose a toast," I said, raising my glass higher. The words were forming in my mouth before I could stop them. 23 years of guilt, regret, and unexpressed grief coalesced into a single, unstoppable moment of truth. Let's raise our glasses to honor the strength and tenderness of Becca's mother, my dear Evelyn. The silence that fell was deafening, the kind of silence that follows a gunshot. Becca froze at the altar, her bouquet clutched so tightly that knuckles turned white. Her eyes found mine, wide with confusion that quickly transformed into something more painful: betrayal. The name of her mother, according to everyone in that room, according to the story we'd maintained for over 2 decades, was Claire, my sister-in-law, the woman who had raised her, the woman who was now staring at me with a mixture of shock and fury. I realized my mistake instantly, but it was too late. The truth had slipped out, a single name that shattered the elaborate fiction we'd constructed, a name that Becca had never heard associated with herself. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no words came out. Then, in a flurry of white tulle and lace, she dropped her bouquet, gathered her dress in trembling hands, and ran down the aisle, sobbing as if her soul had been torn apart. "Becca," Thomas called out, stunned and confused. He looked at me, then at Claire, then back at the church doors through which his bride had just fled. The guests began to whisper. Some stood up, uncertain of what to do. Claire remained seated, her face drained of color, her eyes never leaving mine. In that moment, as champagne glasses were slowly lowered and confused murmurs filled the church, I knew the time had come to tell the truth. All of it. From the beginning, even if it cost me everything I had left. Thomas rushed past me, following Becca. Claire's husband, my brother Mark, was at her side now, his hand on her shoulder, his expression unreadable, and I stood alone at the microphone, a man who had just set fire to his daughter's wedding day with a single forbidden name: Evelyn, the woman I had loved, the woman who had given birth to our daughter, the woman whose existence had been erased from our lives, and whose memory had just crashed back into reality in the worst possible way. As I set down my glass and prepared to face the consequences of my words, one thought consumed me. How do you explain to your only child that everything she thought she knew about herself was built on a lie? I still remember the antiseptic smell of the hospital room where my world first fell apart, the sterile white walls, the rhythmic beeping of machines, and the soft weight of my newborn daughter in my arms. It was late February, and a relentless Massachusetts winter storm raged outside, as if nature itself was foreshadowing the turmoil about to engulf my life. Becca was just 4 days old, tiny and perfect, with Evelyn's warm brown eyes and my stubborn chin. I was sitting in the visitor's chair beside the empty bed, waiting for the nurses to bring Evelyn back from what they'd described as routine post-delivery tests. She'd been experiencing some concerning symptoms: headaches, dizziness, elevated blood pressure, but the doctors had assured me it was being monitored. When the door opened, I expected to see my wife's tired but radiant smile. Instead, Claire walked in, her face a carefully composed mask of solemnity. She was wearing an expensive black pantsuit that seemed oddly formal for a hospital visit, clutching a manila envelope in her manicured hands. "Frank," she said, her voice steady and controlled, "I need you to be strong right now." Even before she pulled out the death certificate, I knew. Something in her eyes, not grief, but something else I couldn't quite identify, told me that Evelyn was gone. Or at least, that's what Claire wanted me to believe. She had complications, Claire continued, placing the document in my trembling hands. A pulmonary embolism after the cesarean. It was quick. The doctors did everything they could. I stared at the certificate, the official letterhead of Massachusetts General Hospital swimming before my tear-filled eyes. Cause of death: pulmonary embolism, secondary to pregnancy. Time of death: 3:47 a.m. "I want to see her," I managed to choke out, Becca squirming against my chest as if she sensed my distress. "I need to say goodbye." Claire's hand landed on my shoulder, her grip surprisingly firm. "It's too late, Frank. I've already made the arrangements. It's better this way, quick, without suffering. The funeral home has already taken care of everything." Something about her words felt wrong, but grief clouded my judgment. I was a 40-year-old high school principal who had just become both a father and a widower in the same week. My brain couldn't process it all. I simply nodded, numb and broken. Claire took Becca from my arms with practiced efficiency. "Let me help with her while you process this," she said. It wasn't really an offer, more of a statement of what would happen next. 2 days later, Claire moved into our colonial-style house in Brookline to help with the baby. She brought 3 suitcases and a determination that I mistook for compassion. I was drowning in grief and medical bills. Evelyn's complicated pregnancy had maxed out our insurance, and the hospital charges kept coming. Meanwhile, I had a newborn who needed constant care and a job I couldn't afford to lose. What I didn't recognize then was how systematically Claire inserted herself into every aspect of our lives, how she rearranged Evelyn's closet before I could even bring myself to look at my wife's clothes, how she intercepted calls from Evelyn's friends, telling them I was too distraught to speak, how she gradually assumed not just the role of caretaker for Becca, but something more, as if she were erasing Evelyn and replacing her with herself. I was too shattered to notice the red flags. The way she insisted on being listed as Becca's mother on daycare forms, for simplicity's sake. How she subtly discouraged me from displaying photos of Evelyn. The mysterious disappearance of my wife's journals and personal effects. But there was one warning that should have broken through my fog of grief. The night before Becca was born, as Evelyn and I waited anxiously for her scheduled C-section, my wife had gripped my hand with unexpected urgency. "Frank," she'd whispered, her eyes intense with an emotion I couldn't place. "If anything happens to me, don't trust Claire." I'd dismissed it as pregnancy anxiety or hormones. Evelyn and Claire had never been close. Typical sister-in-law tension, I thought. Nothing serious. How catastrophically wrong I was. For years, I suppressed my doubts. I watched Claire raise my daughter with rigid discipline and cold efficiency. I accepted her explanations for why we never spoke of Evelyn. "It's too painful for Becca to know her mother died giving birth to her," she would say. "Let her believe I'm her mother. It's kinder this way." And so the lie grew. Becca called Claire Mom. My brother Mark, Claire's husband, became a distant uncle figure who visited occasionally but never stayed long. No one questioned our strange family arrangement. Or if they did, they didn't question it to my face. It might have continued that way indefinitely if I hadn't been clearing out the attic for renovations on Becca's 16th birthday. Behind a stack of old college textbooks, I found a dust-covered box I didn't recognize. Inside was an envelope with Evelyn's distinctive handwriting. "For Frank, open if something happens to me." The seal was still intact. With trembling fingers, I broke it open and pulled out 2 documents. A handwritten will that had never been filed with any court, and a letter that would shatter the foundations of the life I'd rebuilt. "My dearest Frank," it began, "if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. I've sensed Claire watching me, following me. She's obsessed with having what I have. You, our baby, our life. If I disappear, it's because Claire made me disappear. Find me, Frank. For our child's sake, find me." The paper slipped from my fingers as 20 years of suppressed suspicions crystallized into a terrible possibility. Evelyn might not be dead at all. After discovering Evelyn's letter, I spent 3 sleepless nights pacing the floors of my study. The house creaked and settled around me as I wrestled with impossible questions. My mind raced through every conversation, every strange occurrence of the past 20 years, searching for clues I might have missed. Could Evelyn really be alive? Had Claire somehow falsified a death certificate? It seemed impossible. The kind of conspiracy that exists only in thriller movies, not in the life of a high school principal from Brookline. And yet, the letter was undeniably in Evelyn's handwriting. I'd recognize those looping L's and distinctive F's anywhere. She used to write me love notes during our college days that I'd find tucked into my textbooks. What haunted me most was the uncertainty. If there was even the smallest chance that Evelyn was out there somewhere waiting for me to find her, how could I not try? But if I was wrong, if she truly was gone, what damage would I do by digging up the past? And what about Becca? She was 16 now, preparing for college applications, believing Claire was her mother. Would searching for a ghost destroy the only family she'd ever known? On the 4th night, as a November rain lashed against the windows, I made the decision that would change everything. I would search for Evelyn, but in secret. No one could know, especially not Claire, who still lived in our house despite my brother Mark having moved to Seattle years ago for a tech job. They maintained a strange long-distance marriage that consisted mainly of holiday reunions and monthly phone calls. The next morning, I waited until Claire drove Becca to her SAT prep course before descending into our basement. The space was cluttered with Christmas decorations, old sports equipment, and and boxes of memorabilia that had somehow survived Claire's systematic purging of Evelyn's existence. I moved methodically through the dusty cardboard containers, searching for anything that might help me begin my investigation. In the far corner, behind a broken rowing machine, I found a forgotten steamer trunk with a small brass lock. The key was long gone, but the aged metal gave way easily to a screwdriver's pressure. Inside, wrapped in a faded blue baby blanket, was a photo album I hadn't seen in 2 decades. Each page was a punch to my gut. Evelyn at our wedding, radiant in a simple ivory dress, snowflakes catching in her dark hair. We'd married in December despite everyone warning us about New England winter weddings. Evelyn painting the nursery, her pregnant belly straining against an old Harvard t-shirt, yellow paint splattered across her cheek. Evelyn holding newborn Becca in the hospital, exhausted but triumphant. I ran my fingers over her face in the photographs, tracing the contours of her smile, the dimple in her left cheek that appeared only when she was truly happy. For years, I'd forced myself not to remember these details, convinced that forgetting was the path to healing. But now, each remembered feature felt like a small resurrection. At the back of the album was a small envelope containing the only item of Evelyn's that Claire hadn't managed to dispose of, a silver locket with our engraved initials inside. I'd given it to Evelyn on our first anniversary. She had been wearing it the day she went into labor. I closed my hand around the locket, feeling its weight, the physical proof that Evelyn had existed, had been loved, had not been merely a dream I'd invented. And with that weight came clarity. I would find her, or I would find the truth about what happened to her. There was no middle ground anymore, no comfortable ambiguity in which to hide. That evening, as a weak winter sun cast long shadows across our kitchen, I slipped the locket into my pocket and told Claire I needed to run an errand. "At this hour?" she asked, not looking up from the college brochures she was arranging in neat piles for Becca. "Dinner's almost ready." "School board emergency," I lied, the word surprisingly easy on my tongue. "Budget issue, I won't be long." The antique shop where Evelyn used to browse for vintage jewelry was still there on Beacon Street, though the sign was newer and the window display more modern. Inside, the air smelled of furniture polish and old books, exactly as I remembered. The elderly owner, Mr. Finch, looked up from behind the counter, squinting through thick glasses. "Frank Harrison," he said, recognition dawning slowly on his lined face. "Been a long time." I was surprised he remembered me. I'd only accompanied Evelyn a handful of times, but as I approached the counter and placed the locket on the glass surface, I understood. "I found this," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It belonged to my wife." Mr. Finch picked up the locket with gnarled fingers, turning it over carefully. "Evelyn's piece," he murmured. "Beautiful craftsmanship. German silver, circa 1920s. "You remember her," I said. Not quite a question. His eyes, magnified by the glasses, studied me with unexpected sharpness. Hard to forget someone who comes in every month for years. My heart stuttered. "Years? After she died?" Mr. Finch's expression shifted, confusion giving way to caution. "Died? The young lady didn't die. Changed her name, though. Got thinner, hair different. But those eyes never changed." I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "When did you last see her?" The old man shrugged. "Few weeks back, maybe. She lives nearby. Rents the apartment above the bookstore on Cypress Street." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "She left this here once for repair. Never came back for it. I figured she'd forgotten." I stared at him, trying to process his words. Evelyn was alive, living less than a mile from our home. All this time. "Why are you looking at me like that, Mr. Finch asked, suddenly wary. "Did I say something wrong?" I shook my head, aware that I needed to tread carefully. "No, thank you. You've been very helpful." As I turned to leave, Locket clutched tightly in my palm. He called after me. "If you see her, tell her I fixed the clasp. No charge." Outside, I leaned against the brick wall of the shop, gulping cold air into my lungs. Evelyn was alive. The realization hit me like a physical blow, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. But if she was alive, that meant Claire had orchestrated an elaborate decades-long deception. It meant Becca had been denied her real mother. It meant I had been living with my wife's would-be murderer. And it meant I now faced the most impossible choice of all: confront Claire with what I knew, potentially putting Evelyn at risk again, or find Evelyn first and unravel the truth. knowing that every day I delayed was another day Becca lived in ignorance of her real mother. Standing there in the gathering dusk, I made the first choice there would be no coming back from. I would find Evelyn. Tonight. The address Mr. Finch had given me led to Auburn Street, a narrow lane tucked away behind the main thoroughfare of Brookline. Even though it was less than 2 miles from the house I'd shared with Claire and Becca for 20 years, I'd never had reason to venture down this forgotten stretch of road. It felt like entering another world, a shadow realm existing alongside the life I thought I knew. The November evening had turned bitterly cold. My breath plumed in front of me as I parked my car at the far end of the street and walked slowly toward number 42, a weathered 3-story Victorian subdivided into apartments. The porch light flickered intermittently, casting eerie patterns across peeling blue paint. Beside the entrance, a rusted iron railing led to a basement apartment, its windows dimly illuminated by what looked like candlelight. My hand shook as I approached the main door. The mailboxes in the vestibule had no names, only apartment numbers. I stood there, paralyzed by doubt and fear. What would I say if I came face to face with Evelyn after all these years? Would she even want to see me? Did she hate me for not finding her sooner? I raised my hand to knock on the building's inner door, then lowered it again. Through the weather-beaten wood, I could hear faint classical music, Debussy's Clair de Lune, Evelyn's favorite piece. My throat tightened. This was real. She was here. After 3 false starts, I finally knocked, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the quiet hallway. No response. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. The possibility that I had missed her, that she might have gone out for the evening, hadn't occurred to me until that moment. I'd been so focused on finding her that I hadn't considered the practical realities of her daily life. Of course, she wouldn't be sitting at home waiting for a rescue that never came. I stepped back, looking up at the windows on the 2nd floor. One was slightly ajar despite the cold white curtains billowing gently. On impulse, I circled around to the side of the house, where a narrow alley separated it from the neighboring building. There, a rusted fire escape clung precariously to the brick exterior. What I was considering was technically breaking and entering. I, Franklin Harrison, respected educator and community leader, was contemplating climbing a fire escape to peer into a woman's apartment. The absurdity of it almost made me turn back to my car. But this wasn't just any woman, this was Evelyn, my wife, the mother of my child. If there was even a chance. The metal groaned under my weight as I ascended the rickety stairs. At the 2nd floor landing, I paused, my heart hammering against my ribs. The window with the billowing curtain was just within reach. I leaned forward cautiously, trying to see inside without being obvious to any passers-by on the street below. The apartment was sparsely furnished but neat. A small sofa faced a bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks. A desk in the corner held a laptop and scattered papers. But what stopped my breath entirely was the wall above the desk, covered in photographs of Becca, school portraits through the years. Becca at what must have been her middle school graduation. Becca in her field hockey uniform. Recent candid shots that could only have been taken with a telephoto lens. And in the center, larger than the others, a hospital photo of newborn Becca in Evelyn's arms. The exact same photo I'd found in the album in our basement. Beneath this makeshift shrine to our daughter was a corkboard calendar. Circled in red on January 21st were the words, Becca's birthday. Not just this year's calendar. I could see stacks of previous year's calendars neatly filed in a box underneath the desk. She had been tracking every birthday, every milestone. My vision blurred with tears. Evelyn had never stopped being a mother. She had been watching from a distance, loving our daughter from the shadows. As I shifted my weight to get a better view, the fire escape creaked loudly. Inside the apartment, something moved, a shadow passing quickly across the back wall. I froze, suddenly aware of how suspicious I must look, peering into a woman's apartment at night. Evelyn? I called softly through the crack in the window. Evelyn? It's Frank. Silence. Then the sound of a door closing inside. She was leaving the room, or the apartment entirely. I descended the fire escape quickly, nearly twisting my ankle on the last rusty step, and hurried back around to the front of the building. The main door was now propped open with a brick. Heart racing, I stepped inside and climbed the interior stairs to the 2nd floor. Apartment 2B's door was slightly ajar. I approached cautiously, acutely aware of the enormity of this moment. 20 years of absence condensed into the few feet between me and that doorway. Evelyn? I called again, pushing the door open wider. Please, I just want to talk. The apartment appeared empty, but a teacup on the coffee table was still steaming. She had been here moments ago. I stepped fully inside, closing the door behind me. That's when I noticed the notebook lying open on the desk. I moved closer, drawn by the familiar handwriting. The page contained what looked like observations. Becca wore the blue sweater I sent anonymously for Christmas. Her hair is getting so long now. Frank looks tired. Is Claire working him too hard? Parent-teacher conference tonight? Wish I could be there to hear about her progress in calculus. She's always been good with numbers like me. My hands trembled as I flipped back through the pages. Years of detailed notes about our lives. Evelyn had been watching us, documenting our routines, celebrating Becca's achievements from afar. The depth of her longing was etched into every word. Several pages had been torn out, leaving ragged edges in the binding. What had been on those missing pages? What secrets were too dangerous even for this private journal? As I set the notebook down, I noticed a shadow pass across the curtained window. Someone on the fire escape. I turned quickly, but before I could move toward the window, the apartment door swung open behind me. I spun around, expecting, hoping, to see Evelyn. Instead, an elderly woman with a cane stood in the doorway, her white hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice surprisingly strong for her frail appearance. "What are you doing in Elaine's apartment?" Elaine, not Evelyn, a new name. "I'm looking for the woman who lives here," I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. I'm an old friend." The woman's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Elaine doesn't have friends, keeps to herself, always has. The 7 years she's lived in this building. 7 years, so close to us, for so long. Do you know where she is now?" I asked. The old woman shrugged. "Comes and goes at odd hours. Works nights at the hospital, I think. Quiet neighbor, though sometimes I hear her crying through the walls." She paused, studying my face. "You look familiar. Has she got a picture of you in there?" I swallowed hard. Maybe. We knew each other a long time ago. As I moved toward the door, the woman blocked my path with surprising agility. "She's afraid of something. Or someone. Are you the reason she jumps at shadows?" The accusation stung, but I couldn't blame her for being protective. "No," I said firmly. "I'm the reason she's been hiding. But I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was alive until today." The woman seemed to consider this, then stepped aside. "She says her sister is the devil," she offered unexpectedly. "Says her sister took everything from her. Is that true?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Well," the old woman said, "maybe it's time someone gave something back." As I stepped into the hallway, she called after me. "Check the bench by the old church. She sits there sometimes, watching the school buses go by on Tuesday afternoons." I thanked her and hurried down the stairs, my mind racing. Evelyn was alive, working at a hospital under a new name, watching our daughter grow up from a park bench, living in an apartment filled with reminders of the family that had been stolen from her. And now I knew where to find her. The next step would be the hardest yet, but there was no turning back now. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 12 years. The secretary sounded shocked. I'd once come to school with walking pneumonia rather than let down my students. But today, finding Evelyn took precedence over everything else. I waited until Claire drove Becca to school before slipping out of the house with a bouquet of white tulips. Evelyn's favorites. The florist had raised an eyebrow at my request for tulips in November, but I paid the premium without complaint. Some gestures were worth the cost. The abandoned church on Auburn Street looked even more desolate in the pale morning light. Its Gothic spires reached into a colorless sky, and dead vines clung to the weathered stone facade like gnarled fingers. The wooden bench mentioned by Evelyn's neighbor sat beneath a massive oak tree, its few remaining leaves rustling in the bitter wind. I placed the tulips on the bench and retreated to my car, parked across the street with a clear view of the area. Then I waited. Hours passed. I watched school buses come and go, mothers with strollers, joggers, dog walkers. No Evelyn. As afternoon faded into evening, disappointment settled over me like the gathering darkness. I was about to give up when a slender figure in a gray wool coat approached the bench. Even from a distance, I recognized the way she moved, deliberate yet graceful, like a dancer marking steps. My heart thundered against my ribs as I stepped out of the car. 20 years dissolved in an instant. Despite the white hair, the thinner face, the stooped posture that spoke of prolonged suffering. I would have known her anywhere. She noticed the tulips first, stopping abruptly several feet from the bench. Her hand flew to her mouth. Then she sensed my presence and turned. For one eternal moment, we stared at each other across the empty street. I wanted to run to her, to sweep her into my arms as if the intervening decades had never happened. But the caution in her posture, the way she seemed poised for flight, kept me rooted in place. "Evelyn," I called softly, taking one careful step forward. She shook her head, eyes wide with what looked like fear. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice carrying on the still evening air. "She'll know." "Claire?" I asked, taking another step. "I don't care anymore. I know the truth now." Evelyn glanced nervously over her shoulder. "You don't understand." She's still watching me. She never stopped. Before I could respond, she thrust an envelope into my hands. "I can't talk now. Read this, please." Then she was gone, hurrying down the street with the urgent gait of someone long accustomed to looking over their shoulder. I called after her, but she didn't turn back. In my car, under the harsh dome light, I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a thick stack of letters, each addressed in Evelyn's distinctive handwriting. Some were to me, others to Becca. The dates spanned 2 decades, starting just months after Becca's birth. The first letter, dated August 12, 2001, began simply, "My dearest Frank, I don't know if this will reach you, but I have to try. I'm alive. Claire didn't kill me, though she tried." I read hungrily, piecing together the nightmare that had been Evelyn's reality. According to her letter, Claire had been obsessed with Evelyn's life since they'd met, envious of her relationship with me, her pregnancy, the future we planned. After Becca's birth, when Evelyn was at her most vulnerable, Claire had administered something in her IV that caused a seizure and respiratory distress, symptoms that could mimic a pulmonary embolism. Evelyn survived, but awoke in a private facility under Claire's control. A nurse who suspected something wasn't right helped Evelyn escape, but by then, Claire had already established herself in our home and orchestrated a convincing death. Evelyn, weak and terrified, went into hiding rather than risk Claire harming Becca to maintain her deception. "I've written to you every month," one letter stated. "I've sent packages to Becca for every birthday. I've called your office, left messages with receptionists. Nothing ever gets through. I hired a private investigator once, but he disappeared after 2 weeks. Claire has powerful friends, Frank. She's built an impenetrable wall around you and our daughter." Each letter had been returned, opened and resealed. Some had cruel notes attached in Claire's handwriting. "They don't want you. Frank has moved on. Your daughter calls me Mom now." Tears blurred my vision as I read letter after letter, feeling Evelyn's hope gradually giving way to resignation. The later correspondence became less frequent, more like journal entries she never expected anyone to read. Yet she'd kept writing, kept reaching out into the void, kept loving us from a distance. The most recent letter, dated just 2 months ago, contained a photograph of Becca in her field hockey uniform, taken from the sidelines of a game. "She has my eyes but your determination," Evelyn had written. "I watched her score the winning goal today. No one noticed me cheering. I've become good at being invisible." As I neared the bottom of the stack, I found something unexpected, a worn, official-looking document. It was a court order of protection, filed by Claire against Evelyn 8 years ago, claiming Evelyn was a delusional woman stalking our family. The restraining order prohibited Evelyn from coming within 500 feet of our home, Becca's school, or any family member. Claire had used the legal system to further isolate Evelyn, to brand her as unstable and dangerous. The perfect trap. If Evelyn tried to reveal herself to us, she'd be arrested. If she tried to fight the order, she'd have to explain why a supposedly dead woman was contesting a restraining order. The final item in the envelope was a small, folded note in fresher ink than the others. "If you're reading this, you've finally found me. But it may already be too late. Claire knows something has changed. She called the hospital where I work yesterday, asking about Elaine Winters. No one should know that name. Be careful, Frank. Don't trust anyone connected to her. And please, destroy these letters after you read them. For Becca's safety. For mine." I sat in my car until well past midnight, reading and rereading the letters, feeling 20 years of manufactured reality crumble around me. The woman I'd lived with, the woman who had raised my daughter, was a monster of calculated cruelty, and I had been blind to it all. When I finally drove home, Claire was waiting in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand, her face a mask of concerned irritation. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice honey over steel. "Becca was worried. I had to lie and say you were working late." I looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time in decades. Behind the carefully maintained facade of the supportive sister-in-law, I could finally see the cold calculation, the proprietary gleam when she mentioned Becca, the subtle tension in her posture as she awaited my explanation. "Budget meeting ran long," I lied smoothly, my hand closing around Evelyn's letters in my pocket. "Sorry I didn't call." She studied me for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied. "You look tired. I left a plate for you in the microwave." As I watched her climb the stairs to her bedroom, the bedroom that should have been Evelyn's, I made a silent promise to the woman on the park bench, to my true wife, to Becca's real mother. This ends now. The 6 months between discovering Evelyn and Becca's wedding day were the most agonizing of my life. Each morning, I woke up in a house built on lies, sharing breakfast with the architect of my family's destruction. Each night, I lay awake, planning how to dismantle Claire's carefully constructed fiction without causing Becca irreparable harm. Evelyn and I met in secret. Park benches, coffee shops in neighboring towns, once in the back pew of a crowded cathedral where the echo made eavesdropping impossible. Our conversations were stilted at first, 20 years of silence creating a chasm between us. But gradually, tentatively, we began to rebuild something fragile and precious. She told me everything: how she'd survived Claire's attempt on her life, how she'd spent years trying to reach us, how she'd built a shadow existence as Elaine Winters, night shift lab technician at Boston Memorial Hospital. She showed me the meticulous journals where she'd recorded Becca's life from afar, first steps she'd witnessed through windows, school performances she'd attended disguised in wigs and scarves, achievements she'd celebrated in solitude. "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked during one of our clandestine meetings. Evelyn's laugh was hollow, echoing with years of futility. "I did, Frank. 3 times. The first officer thought I was delusional, a woman claiming to be someone who died years ago. The second time, Claire's brother-in-law was the detective assigned to my case. The third time, I was almost arrested for filing false reports. The truth was even more sinister than I'd imagined. Claire's family had connections throughout Boston's legal and medical establishments. Her father had been chief of surgery at Massachusetts General, her uncle a judge in Suffolk County. Claire hadn't just stolen Evelyn's life. She'd systematically closed every avenue of recourse. "Don't tell Becca yet," Evelyn begged during our final meeting before the wedding. "Let her have this day. Let her marry Thomas without this weight on her shoulders." I'd promised, even as every fiber of my being screamed for justice, for revelation, for the restoration of truth. I promised Evelyn I would wait until after the wedding. But standing there in the reception hall, champagne flute in my trembling hand, something inside me rebelled against 23 years of complicit silence. I looked at my beautiful daughter in her white gown, at Claire beaming with possessive pride in the mother of the bride seat she had no right to occupy, at the guests smiling at what they believed was a perfect family moment. The weight of the lie suddenly felt unbearable. I hadn't planned to speak Evelyn's name, I truly hadn't. The prepared speech in my pocket made no mention of the truth, honored my promise to wait. But in that moment of crystalline clarity, watching Claire bask in the culmination of her decades-long deception, something primal and unstoppable surged through me. Let's raise our glasses to honor the strength and tenderness of Becca's mother, my dear Evelyn. The words escaped like captives breaking free, propelled by years of suppressed grief and rage. As soon as they left my lips, I knew I had betrayed not only Claire but also Evelyn, and worst of all, Becca. I had chosen the most public, sacred moment of my daughter's life to detonate the bomb that would destroy her understanding of herself. The silence that followed was absolute, as if every molecule of air had been sucked from the room. 200 faces turned toward me in collective confusion. Thomas at the head table furrowed his brow. His parents exchanged bewildered glances. Only 3 people fully comprehended what had just happened. Me, caught in the grip of a truth I could no longer contain. Claire, whose carefully constructed house of cards began to collapse in real time. And Becca, whose world I had just shattered with a single name. My daughter's face transformed before my eyes, confusion giving way to shock, then a terrible, dawning comprehension. Something in her expression told me she'd always sensed a wrongness she couldn't articulate, always felt the hollow space where truth should have been. When she dropped her bouquet and ran, the sound of her heels on the parquet floor echoed like gunshots. Thomas called after her, then turned to me with accusation in his eyes before chasing his bride. Claire remained seated, immobile as a statue, her face a mask of cold fury. Around us, guests began to whisper, theories and questions rippling through the crowd like wind through tall grass. "Frank," my brother Mark said, appearing at my elbow, "what the hell are you doing?" But I couldn't answer him. I couldn't explain that the woman he'd married, the woman he'd spent decades believing was helping raise her dead sister's child, was actually a calculating monster who had stolen another woman's life and identity. Instead, I set down my glass with deliberate care and moved toward the exit. I needed to find Becca. I needed to explain. I needed to undo the damage my impulsive truth-telling had wrought. I found her in the bridal suite, Thomas standing helplessly outside the locked door. Her sobs penetrated the thick wood, each one a knife to my heart. "What did you mean?" Thomas demanded, his tuxedo jacket discarded, bow tie hanging loose around his neck. "Who is Evelyn? Why is Becca—" "It's complicated," I said, the understatement of the century. "Please, I need to speak with her alone." "She's my wife," he protested. "And she's my daughter," I replied, my voice breaking. "And what I've done to her requires an explanation only I can give." After a long moment, Thomas stepped aside. I knocked gently on the door. "Becca," I called, resting my forehead against the smooth wood. "Sweetheart, please, let me explain." "Go away." Her voice was raw, wounded. "You ruined everything, on my wedding day." "I know," I acknowledged, guilt washing over me in suffocating waves. "I made a terrible mistake. But what I said about your mother, it's true, and it's time you knew." The door flew open so suddenly I nearly fell forward. Becca stood there, mascara streaking her cheeks, veil askew, eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen in my gentle daughter. "My mother is Claire," she said, each word precise and cutting. "The woman who raised me, the woman who has been there every day of my life, and you just humiliated her in front of everyone we know." I shook my head, the magnitude of what I needed to explain overwhelming me. "No, Becca. Claire is your aunt. Your mother, your birth mother, is a woman named Evelyn, Claire's sister, my wife, and she's alive." Becca stared at me, speechless. Behind her, I could see the trappings of what should have been the happiest day of her life. The dress bag hanging on the closet door, the professional photos of her getting ready, champagne glasses with lipstick marks on their rims. "You're drunk," she finally said, her voice flat. "Or you're having some kind of breakdown. Either way, I can't deal with this now. This is my wedding day." "Was," came Claire's voice from behind me. She had followed me, her footsteps soundless on the carpeted hallway. "I've informed the guests there's been a medical emergency. The reception is canceled." She brushed past me to stand beside Becca, placing a proprietary arm around my daughter's shoulders. "Your father is confused," she said soothingly. "We'll get him help." In that moment, seeing them together, Claire's arm around Becca, my daughter leaning into the embrace of the woman who had stolen her from her real mother, I realized the true depth of Claire's victory. She had so thoroughly inserted herself into our lives that even in the face of the truth, her position seemed unassailable. "Becca," I said desperately, "she's lying. She's been lying for 23 years. Your real mother is alive. She loves you. She's been watching over you your whole life." My daughter looked at me with eyes that no longer trusted, no longer recognized the father she thought she knew. And in her gaze, I saw the consequence of my impulsive confession. I had lost her. The 3 days following Becca's ruined wedding were a special kind of hell. I was banished from our family home. Claire had changed the locks while I sat in my car outside the reception venue, watching guests file out in confused clusters. Thomas's parents glared as they passed, their son's wedding day reduced to whispers and speculation. The catering staff packed away untouched appetizers and a wedding cake that would never be cut. I checked into the Marriott downtown, a sterile room with beige walls and a view of an office building. There, I called Evelyn to confess my catastrophic failure. "I told her," I admitted, my voice hollow with self-recrimination. "At the wedding, I broke my promise to you." The silence on the other end stretched until I thought we'd been disconnected. Then softly, "How did she take it?" "Badly," I said, the understatement scraping my throat. "She thinks I'm having a breakdown. Claire's convinced her I need psychiatric help. Another long pause. I was afraid of this, Evelyn finally said. Claire's had 23 years to secure her position. She won't give up without destroying anything, or anyone, that threatens her narrative. She was right. By the next morning, Claire had contacted the school board with concerns about my mental state. My brother Mark called to suggest I get help before I did more damage to the family. Even my closest colleagues were treating me with the wary deference reserved for someone experiencing a psychotic break. It was a masterful strategy. Claire was leveraging her decades of careful reputation building to ensure that if I tried to expose her, I'd be dismissed as delusional. Who would believe that the respected, devoted mother of the bride was actually an identity thief who had faked her sister's death? It sounded like the plot of a bad thriller, not something that happened to real people in Brookline, Massachusetts. On the third day, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. Botanical Gardens, Japanese Pavilion, 3 p.m. Come alone. No signature, but I knew instinctively it was Becca. The Boston Botanical Gardens were nearly empty on that cold November afternoon. Dried leaves skittered across the paths as I made my way to the Japanese Pavilion, a wooden structure overlooking a dormant koi pond. Becca was already there, bundled in her red wool coat, hair pulled back in a severe ponytail that emphasized the shadows under her eyes. "You came," she said, not looking at me. I nodded, afraid to speak, afraid to shatter this fragile opportunity. "I've been thinking about what you said," she continued, her breath visible in the chilly air. "About her, Claire, and my real mother." Hope flickered, weak, but persistent. "It's true, Becca. All of it. That's what I need to determine." Her voice was flat, detached. The emotional rawness of the wedding day had been replaced by something harder, more clinical. "I need evidence. Not just your word against the woman who raised me." I reached for the inside pocket of my coat where I kept Evelyn's letters, but Becca held up a hand to stop me. "Not letters or photos or anything that could be fabricated. I need to understand why you've suddenly decided, after 23 years, to tell me that my mother isn't my mother." The unfairness of her accusation stung, but I understood. From her perspective, I was the one disrupting a lifetime of stability. Claire had always been her mother. I was the one changing the rules. "I only found out she was alive 6 months ago," I explained. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you without ruining my wedding day," she interrupted, a flash of the hurt and anger she was suppressing breaking through her composed facade. I winced. I made a terrible mistake. The timing, the public setting, it was inexcusable. "Then why did you do it?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for 3 sleepless nights. Why had I chosen that moment of all moments to speak the truth? Looking at my daughter's wounded face, I owed her complete honesty. "Because I couldn't bear to watch Claire take one more thing that belonged to Evelyn," I admitted. "Your wedding day, the mother of the bride role, the dance that should have been Evelyn's, it felt like the final theft. And something in me just broke." Becca studied me, her eyes, so much like Evelyn's, searching for deception or delusion. Finding neither, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. I recognized it instantly. My mother's music box, passed down to Evelyn on our wedding day, meant to be given to our daughter when she turned 16. In the chaos of Evelyn's death, I'd forgotten about it entirely. "This was in my closet," Becca said. "Behind my winter boots and a box of things Claire told me came from your mother." She opened the lid and a tinkling melody filled the cold air. Debussy's Claire de Lune, the same piece I'd heard outside Evelyn's apartment. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a folded piece of paper that looked relatively new. "I found this hidden in a secret compartment," Becca continued, her voice barely audible over the delicate music. "It has 3 words. Ela está viva." My breath caught. "Portuguese," I whispered. "It means, is she alive?" "I know what it means," Becca said. "Mom, Claire, made me take Portuguese in high school. She insisted it would be good for college applications. Of course she did. Claire would have wanted Becca to understand if she ever found the note. Another layer of cruelty in her elaborate game. "What I don't understand," Becca continued, "is why this was hidden in my grandmother's music box, or why it's in my handwriting." I stared at her, uncomprehending. "Your handwriting?" Becca nodded, opening the note to show me. The 3 words were indeed written in Becca's distinctive script. The same slightly slanted letters I'd seen on school essays and birthday cards for years. "I don't remember writing this," she said, "but it's definitely my handwriting. And it was hidden in a box Claire gave me when I was 16. The implications were staggering. Had Becca somehow discovered or suspected the truth years ago? Had she written herself a note only to forget? Or was this another of Claire's psychological manipulations? "Becca," I said carefully, "I can prove everything I've told you. Your mother, your birth mother, wants to meet you. She's been waiting for this moment for 23 years. My daughter closed the music box with a decisive snap, silencing Debussy mid-phrase. She stared at it for a long moment, running her fingers over the inlaid pattern as if trying to read answers in its surface. "She's alive?" Becca finally asked, her voice small and uncertain, like the child she'd once been, asking if monsters were real. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. "Yes. And she loves you? She's never stopped loving you." Becca took a deep breath, squared her shoulders and looked me directly in the eyes. "Then take me to her." We drove in silence to Auburn Street, the music box nestled in Becca's lap. As we approached Evelyn's apartment building, I could sense my daughter's growing tension. Her breathing quickened, her knuckles whitened around the wooden box. This was the moment that would either heal or permanently fracture our family. Evelyn was waiting for us on the porch, as if she'd somehow sensed we were coming. She looked both older and more vibrant than during our furtive meetings. She'd styled her prematurely white hair, applied subtle makeup, worn a blue dress that matched her eyes. Our eyes. Becca's eyes. Mother and daughter regarded each other across the short distance from car to porch steps. 23 years of separation compressed into a single, electric moment of recognition. As Becca emerged from the passenger seat, still clutching the music box, Evelyn's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she drank in the sight of her adult daughter standing before her for the first time. "Becca," she breathed, the name a prayer on her lips. But my daughter took a step back, her face hardening. "She lied for 23 years, she whispered, not to Evelyn but to me. The betrayal in her voice was devastating. Evelyn collapsed to her knees on the weathered porch steps, one hand reaching out instinctively toward the daughter who recoiled from her. In that moment, I understood that truth alone wasn't enough to repair what had been broken. The weight of 2 decades of deception couldn't be lifted by a single revelation. I moved to intervene, to bridge the impossible gap between the 2 women I loved most in the world. But before I could speak, Becca turned to me, her eyes swimming with confused tears, and asked the question that pierced my heart more deeply than any accusation could have. "Why did you allow this?" In her question, I heard not just the immediate betrayal of discovering Claire's deception, but the deeper wound of knowing I had failed to protect her from a lifetime of lies. And standing there between my daughter and the wife I'd believed dead, I had no adequate answer to give. 3 months can change everything. Or nothing at all. Winter descended on Boston with a vengeance, burying Auburn Street under drifts of snow that glittered beneath streetlights like diamond dust. Evelyn retreated back into isolation, her brief moment of hope extinguished by Becca's rejection. My daughter fled to Portland, Oregon, staying with college friends and taking an indefinite leave from her graphic design job. Thomas went with her, his loyalty unwavering despite the chaos that had engulfed their wedding day. Claire remained in our house, reorganizing closets and repainting rooms as if erasing any lingering trace of my presence. I moved permanently into a small apartment near my school, my possessions reduced to what fit in my car. At 63, I found myself essentially starting over, surrounded by IKEA furniture and empty walls. The school board, after careful deliberation, allowed me to keep my position as principal. 28 years of dedicated service had earned me enough goodwill to weather Claire's campaign to have me removed. But the whispers followed me through hallways and faculty meetings. Had Frank Harrison finally cracked under pressure? Was he having a late-life crisis? A mental breakdown? I lived in a strange limbo, caught between 3 points of a fractured family. Evelyn wouldn't return my calls, screening everything through her elderly neighbor. Becca communicated exclusively through terse text messages, usually to cancel our planned video chats. Claire sent formal communications through her lawyer regarding property division and divorce proceedings. December bled into January, and January crawled toward February. Snow fell and was shoveled away, only to fall again. I developed a routine of sorts: work, take-out dinners for one, falling asleep to PBS documentaries. On weekends, I drove past Evelyn's apartment, sometimes leaving flowers or books on her doorstep, never knowing if she found them. On a particularly bitter morning in late February, I woke to an unexpected sound, someone knocking on my door. Not the hesitant tap of a neighbor or the authoritative rap of a package delivery, but a deliberate, familiar rhythm that instantly transported me back 20 years. Becca used to knock that way as a child. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slower ones. Our secret code when she wanted to enter my home office. I scrambled out of bed, not bothering with a robe over my flannel pajamas, and flung open the door. There she stood, my daughter, bundled in her red wool coat, snowflakes melting in her dark hair. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes clear and direct for the first time since the wedding. "Becca," I breathed, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had brought her to my door at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice steady but tentative, like someone testing ice on a frozen pond. I stepped back, gesturing her inside. My apartment was embarrassingly sparse. A second-hand couch, a small TV on a metal stand, bookshelves made of cinder blocks and boards, so different from the comfortable colonial where she'd grown up. Becca didn't seem to notice the surroundings. She stood in the center of my living room, clutching a canvas tote bag against her chest like a shield. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other, father and daughter, connected by blood and memory, separated by betrayal and hurt. "I went back to the house yesterday," she finally said. "Claire was out, some charity luncheon. I used my old key." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I wanted to look through my baby things," Becca continued. "The boxes in the attic that I never paid much attention to. Things Claire said were too precious to throw away but too painful for you to see." My heart quickened. Those boxes had been off limits for as long as I could remember. Claire's territorial claim over Becca's childhood memorabilia. Becca reached into her tote bag and withdrew something pale blue and small. A baby dress, delicately smocked across the bodice. Tiny pearl buttons marching down the back. The fabric was worn but clean, as if it had been carefully preserved. "This was in one of the boxes," she said, holding the dress between us. "Along with this." From her pocket she produced a yellowed Polaroid photograph. Evelyn, much younger, holding newborn Becca wrapped in the blue dress. Both were asleep, Evelyn's head tilted back against hospital pillows. Becca nestled in the crook of her arm. Someone had captured the moment. I realized with a jolt that it must have been me, though I had no memory of taking the photo or ever seeing it afterward. "She made this dress," Becca said. Not quite a question. I nodded, memories flooding back. "Evelyn sewed it during her last trimester. She said our daughter needed something special to wear home from the hospital." Becca ran her fingers over the delicate stitching, the small embroidered flowers at the collar. The same dress was in a photo frame in her apartment, the one we went to 3 months ago. I remembered, the shrine-like wall of photographs documenting Becca's life from afar. The centerpiece had been this dress, preserved under glass like a holy relic. "She kept it all this time," Becca murmured. "This tiny thing from before everything went wrong." I watched her face carefully, trying to gauge where this was leading. "Yes, she kept everything she could of you." Becca looked up, her eyes suddenly fierce. "Claire lied to me. My entire life." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes. And you didn't know? All these years?" The question I'd been dreading, the one I still couldn't answer without revealing my own terrible failures as a father, as a husband. I believed what Claire told me, that Evelyn had died. I struggled to find words that wouldn't sound like excuses. I was broken, Becca, grieving. Claire stepped in, and I let her take control because I couldn't. My daughter's expression softened slightly. I found other things in those boxes. Letters from Evelyn's friends asking about the funeral. Cards from her colleagues, all unopened. She paused, swallowing hard. And medical records, showing that the complications after my birth were induced by an overdose of medication that wasn't prescribed. I stared at her, shock washing through me. "You found proof? Actual medical documentation of what Claire did?" Becca nodded, her face grim. "Claire kept the evidence, maybe as some kind of trophy or maybe as insurance. Either way, she preserved the very records that prove her guilt." The irony was staggering. Claire's pathological need to control every aspect of our lives had led her to retain the evidence of her crimes. Perhaps she'd kept the documents to remind herself of her victory. never imagining that Becca would one day go searching through those carefully preserved boxes. "There's more," my daughter continued, reaching again into her tote bag. "I found these." She pulled out a stack of small packages, each wrapped in colorful paper, each addressed to Rebecca Harrison in Evelyn's handwriting. Birthday presents that had never been delivered, cards that had never been opened. 23 years of maternal love, intercepted and hidden away in an attic box. "She tried to reach me," Becca said, her voice breaking for the first time. "All these years, and I never knew." I moved toward her then, cautiously, as if approaching a wounded animal. When she didn't back away, I gently took her hand. "She never stopped being your mother, Becca, even when she couldn't be with you." My daughter looked down at the blue dress still clutched in her other hand. "She sewed this for me, didn't she? Before she even knew what I would look like. Before she knew she would lose me." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Becca took a deep, steadying breath, squared her shoulders, and met my eyes with new resolve. "Then maybe I need to know the woman who dressed me before she lost me." The echo of hope in her voice was unmistakable, faint but real, like the first green shoot after a devastating forest fire. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of a beginning. "Thomas is waiting in the car," she added, gesturing toward the window. "We're flying back to Portland tonight, but I'd like to see her first, if she's willing." I moved to the window and saw Thomas in the rental car below, engine running, exhaust creating a white cloud in the frigid air. He looked up as if sensing my gaze and offered a small nod of acknowledgement. "She's willing," I said, turning back to Becca. "She's been waiting for this moment for 23 years. As we prepared to leave, Becca paused at the door, the blue dress carefully folded, and returned to her bag. "Dad," she said, the words still carrying the weight of our fractured trust. "This doesn't fix everything. I'm still angry. I still have questions. So many questions." "I know," I acknowledged, the guilt of my passive role in her deception still a stone in my chest. "We all have a long way to go." Becca nodded, her expression thoughtful. "But maybe this is where we start, with the truth, however painful it is, with the blue dress that connects who I was to who I am now." As we walked out into the snowy morning toward Thomas's waiting car, I felt something shift and settle inside me. Not resolution, not yet, but a realignment, like a broken bone that has finally been set properly and can begin the long process of healing. Some lies are so deep, so intricately woven into the fabric of our lives, that uncovering them threatens to unravel everything we thought we knew. For 23 years, I watched my daughter grow up calling another woman mother, while her real mother watched from the shadows, sending birthday gifts that were never delivered, writing letters that were never read. What would you have done in my place? Would you have maintained the comfortable lie or risked everything for a truth that could destroy the family you had left? The wounds created by Claire's deception will take years to heal, if they ever truly do. But on that snowy morning when Becca stood at my door holding the tiny blue dress her real mother had sewn for her, I learned something profound about love and truth. They cannot be buried forever. Like water finding its way through stone, the truth will always find a path. And while it may cause pain in the moment, that pain is the price we pay for authentic connection. For Becca, Evelyn, and myself, the road ahead is uncertain, but at least we're finally walking it in the light of truth, rather than the shadow of lies. If this story touched something in your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for truth and reconciliation. Follow our channel for more stories that explore the depths of human experience and the resilience of the human spirit. Like and share if you believe, as I now do, that even the most painful truth is better than the most comfortable lie. Thank you for listening to my story.